So how can I be ambitious but artful? And that has been, what do I care less about? What do I just trust or just don't invest my energy into? And what do I care about? And what is impactful? And how can I really bring that intentionality to doing that, even though it feels in our hyper achiever world that I'm underperforming because I'm doing less, but giving myself the permission to know that I'm, at the risk of sounding arrogant, but I might be one step further in this journey that we call awakening than many people in my environment, and therefore it should feel a bit uncomfortable for me because I'm trying to do something differently that maybe people around me haven't quite seen the value of for, and that's okay. I'm saying that with love and kindness and non-judgment, but it's hard sometimes is to just shivel that way into getting some space around you, and giving myself permission to not feel guilty about that.
Hello, Eric.
Hey
Good morning.
Natalie.
So Eric and I met, what would it have been, about 2 years ago now? 3 years? No,
Yes,
2 years.
2 years, time flies.
Yeah. In a beautiful location in West Sussex in the UK, going very deep on a developmental program. And I'm really intrigued about how you take some of what we learn in the developmental coaching space into your role as a leader and a manager in an organization. Because I know you're a big thinker, you're a deep thinker, and I'm just really intrigued of how you bring that into your work, what it brings you, what maybe what challenges that brings you as well.
Yeah.
But I'm going to start with my question, which might take us a bit off course, but let's see. So, my first question to you is, what are you ambitious about?
What am I ambitious about? I am ambitious about being a good person and helping to build a good society. And that's been a big part of um, my developmental journey, is figuring out what I mean by good for myself, what that sense of personal integrity is, and then also how that translates into how I find purpose in the world. And I think as I grew up, or awakened, or use whatever word you would like to use, um, I think that definition of ambition very shifted from the big house, the big car, the big title, to more to that internal meaning making. And that's ultimately what coaching is about. But I guess where my coaching journey originally originated from was that sense for a theoretical foundation towards meaning making, but also then that intentionality, I guess, to how do we bring more intentionality to our meaning maker and the meaning we make with others as we figure out ways to co-create towards this good society, whatever that means to each of us.
Um, what does that mean?
I've done a lot of depth analysis work on this. So just for people that might not know, depth analysis to me means very much spending the time to like double click on like values and purpose and what your mission is, like how do you show up every day, and what do you show up for. So I did a lot of that work. And I think there's two things that stood out for me. There is kind of a sense of like more metaphysical purpose for me, that the bigger, broader brushstroke. I believe we are all spiritual beings having this experience for the purpose of giving and receiving love, and it's a dance of love. And for me, um, it's all about figuring out how to dance that dance better, with each other, very much from a metaphysical perspective. But then bringing it down to realities of day to day, I think it's about finding things that you care about, finding things um, that you want to see more of in the world, and giving your energy and your attention there. For example, sustainability has been a theme that I feel drawn to, feel impassioned by, feel I need to give more to, specifically digital sustainability now in an AI age as well. Like, how do I bring my skills and my expertise and my energy towards that in service of trying to hold space for a future that, in my opinion, holds that with more love, and just very much listing out those things. Like, I over there, I count that I have like 12 topics that I feel I care about. I'm trying to narrow those down a bit because I've recognized that I can't really have impact across 12 broad societal themes. But just doing that work, I think, is very, very helpful. Like things like universal basic income, I care about. I see the value of that. I'm trying to figure out how can I be in service to that. Things like intergenerational living, like what can I as an individual do, and how can I start and help co-creating in service of that. And just listing them out like that has been hugely helpful to me.
I was saying that what you were sharing was reminding me of that beautiful session that you ran for us at our
Mm.
last developmental coaching gathering around hope,
Yeah.
and just like the positivity and the energy that you brought around how we view some of the most kind of difficult things that matter.
Yeah, I've really trying to figure out ways to incorporate that work as well as the inner developmental goals work more into my proposition to the world, or how I engage with the world and co-create. The act of hope work that you're specifically referring to, like that's based on Johanna Macy and Chris Johnston's work. It kind of goes back to the 80s, but it's all about a recognition, firstly, that for us to change the world, we need to change ourselves. So again,
Mm,
building from the inside out. And then when we start talking about how do we change ourselves, it's how do we change ourselves in community through deeper connections, and more reverence for the connections that connects each other. And the work that reconnects is very much a just a conversation structure that really helps us first to connect with our gratitude,
mm,
because um, it's that acknowledgement that the things that we care about and are grateful for the most is the things that will motivate us and give us resilience through our pain. It is about just being able to name our pain, because again, the assumption is that if we cannot at least name the troubles, we cannot
mm.
effectively deal with them and hold them, and be with the trouble and transform them. And then it's that recognition of, if we can name the trouble, can we find ways to show up for it, and to see it differently? And then can we really activate that hope that we get from seeing differently? Can we activate that hope with action? And it can be small actions day to day. It can be big actions, ambitious actions. It doesn't really matter. I think it's about going through that process and acknowledging that there's we all can find an action towards co-creating a better world.
Yeah, and I think we can be ambitious about the small things as well. About how do we be more intentional in our everyday lives? How do we stop and think? How do we spend time thinking about what are the two or three things that actually I do really care about? And what you shared reminded me of, can't remember who says it. It might even be Bill Plotkin, but the author, he or whoever it was, talks about how making people feel bad about climate change and the environment isn't actually how we create change. It's about connecting more with nature and the environment, and
Mm.
that way we care about it because we are connected to it rather than feeling guilty or bad about it.
Yeah. I spoke this other day about how I again feel like our over individualization in the world has created this disconnect, and how I feel like the active hope work, but also the sustainability work, how it needs to start with us just honoring our interconnectedness again, and very much from an ecological perspective. Like, we know the planet is an ecology, we know it's a system. We know when one part of that system isn't working, other parts isn't working. So we like from a cerebral place, we know this. But then the question is also how can we honor this more from a heart space? And I think that's about really getting into that for me personally, it's about getting into that space of that I would call spirituality personally. And for me, spirituality is that recognition that we're all in that dance together, right? And the way that I take my steps does determine how the steps that you can take and the opportunities available to you, similar to what you do, impacts me. And it's that can be beautiful and graceful in terms of how we can give and receive love through the dance, but it can also be quite like traumatic and negative in how we shift trauma from person to person as well.
Yeah, I like that thought. Just the notion that the small actions that we do really does impact like a wave other people. And that note that focus on an individual self and society kind of ignores that fact to a certain extent. It kind of yeah, ignores the impact of the, the the domino wave of just the small things and how we interact with people and things that we offer and things that we say even.
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
it is all a system, and once you start looking at it as a system in which we play our part both as protagonists as well as antagonists, I think that's really, really important to recognize. And that's one of the things that I kind of got from our vertical developmental work, right? Is this journey towards more complexity, this journey towards being able to hold more complexity and see ourselves as both the the solution as well as the problem. Because I think it's only when we get to that place where we can see ourselves as individuals as that, but also as groups and society as that, we really start to see how we show up to co-create the good as well as the bad.
Yeah. I do want to ask you about your faith, but before I do that, so you were going quite deep in learning developmental coaching and how to work with other people in the developmental space, and you've taken that back into your, should we say, day-to-day role in your organization. And I wonder how you bring some of that in and how you bring all of what you've just spoken about into your work. What's that like for you?
I think it starts from the inside out, right? And we one of the quotes that we've very very much embraced on our program together was that quote around the quality of an intervention depends on the internal state of the intervener, and I I think there's a lot of truth in that, right? I think our ability to co-create consciously really is conditioned on our ability to be conscious ourselves. Um, and though we all kind of slip in and out of kind of consciousness all of the time. Sometimes we run on autopilot, sometimes we are more intentional and mindful. And that's fine, that's part of being human, right? But I think the more we're able to put ourselves into a state of owning our contribution for fully, again, how I'm part of the problem as well as part of the solution, I think the more consciously we can show up. And I think that's the first thing for me is really, and that's always been the thing for me in terms of development. It's always been this journey of trying to figure out like how can I hold better space for myself in a non-egoic way, right? And then once I'm once I'm able to have that self-awareness and self regulation or self-command to hold space for myself more consciously, how can I invite others into that space more consciously as well and be more conscious of them? And that's been, I think, the journey for me. So from a coaching perspective, I think there's our program for me has been as much a journey of self as Eric as it has been a journey as Eric as a coach. And I think coaching is so deeply that, right? It, it is such an intimate space where you're really holding somebody's deepest and darkest confessions, right? Like you need to we need to really build that internal resilience to be able to hold that with respect. And I love the program and coaching as that methodology for doing that inner development. I think it's great. And in the way that I feel like I bring it into my role, so I'm an engineering manager for a software engineering for an insurance organization in their software engineering sub organization, and I think firstly, especially in the tech industry, it's been about recognizing the beauty and the value for spaciousness, because like coaching cannot happen without spaciousness. It's like it's impossible. And I really learned that in my journey as an external coach. So trying to create those moments of spaciousness back into the organization has been really important to me as a catalyst for actual meaningful connection, because we can get so lost in just doing for the sake of doing, and really trying to hold that vibration of how do we do, like how do we first really be present with what we're trying to create here and why we're trying to create it, and then start thinking about the doing. And for me, it's been very, again, just trying to pull back to that, right? I think has been my journey so far. Yeah, is there anything specific in there that you might want to double tap on?
Yeah, I mean, well, yeah, a few questions. One is, what would your team say? Like, do you think if I went and asked them, like, um, how 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 their experience of you as a manager is, what do you think they would say?
That's such a good question. We should go ask them after this podcast. I would hope that they would firstly say that I'm still a good manager. I would hope that they would recognize that I've become, I think, more hands off as well. I feel like I've really that fundamental notion that sits underneath coaching, that people are fully whole, fully resourced, and fully capable. I've really had to do some work in myself to build that trust with people around me, and I hope that that would translate into the way that I show up for my teams. Um, I feel like they would notice that I've given myself more kindness in the same way that I would offer that to them. And again, just that kindness is simple as just inviting in more spaciousness, right? They just slow down and really go through this conversation intentionally. Um, I hope they would notice that I'm speaking out more from my personal place of integrity and what I feel is right rather than just what is easy. But I think they would also notice that it's hard, right? I think we've spoken a lot about coaching conversations, for lack of a better word, that I have within my organization as a manager to somebody in my team that I have performance management responsibility for. It's very different to a coaching conversation one on one where I'm much more I'm able to be much more objective, right? Um, but I still feel there's value in that coaching mindset into that manager relationship. But it is hard to fully put your own agenda away because you have a vested interest, right? And that's always very difficult. I think the difficult balance between bringing a coaching mindset into an organization and being a coach in an organization. I think it's very hard to be a coach because of that vested interest you always have and you can't get away from.
So yeah, I guess the competing, what's the word I'm looking for? The competing priorities and expectations you have, because you have multiple different stakeholders that are requiring you to kind of do different things, whether it's the team or your leadership or the overall tasks of your team.
And you can't fully get away from that, right? You can't fully get away from the fact that as a manager, there's a strong sense of the responsibility stops with you, right? So you can't fully go into any conversation and fully just trust, right? It's hard sometimes to do that. And also just fully to take a conversation and see where it wants to go. That's a big thing a big developmental thing for me coming out of embodying being a coach alongside being a manager has been trust in where conversations go, right? And trust that it will, you have to hold it like lightly. You can't bring all of these frameworks and thought processes and thinking paradigms to it and then drown out the magic that's happening between two people in a conversation and the authenticity that comes with that. And I try to bring that to my day job, but it's hard in the day job because you, as a manager and a leader in an organization, there's some sort of expectation around you need to achieve outcomes. But it's like, I think coming back to the vertical developmental as well, it's like how do you cultivate knowledge, being a knowledge expert in yourself as well as in your teams? How do you cultivate being an achiever yourself and in your teams, but not being had by it? Because the moment we get had by it, we just do for the sake of doing, and then we just so easily find ourselves part of this perpetuating system. And it's like widening concentric circles of that system, right? Yeah.
Yeah, I'm trying to think which direction to go. I think you just articulate, I mean, you articulate yourself really well, and you articulate this complexity of perhaps being guided by values and principles and having a developmental mindset whilst also needing to achieve and drive outcomes and meet other people's expectations. It's like it's really challenging.
Yeah, it is challenging, and I think we forget that very similar to how we as individuals go through these vertical developmental stages in terms of where we increase our complexity to sense and to make sense of, as do the containers in which we come together to collaborate and co-create, right? And those containers are communities, but the most common container we all co-create in is our jobs, right? It's the company you work for or the organization you work for, and our individual mechanisms to make meaning of the world, those translate into the containers in which we co-create, right? Like if you think about us as individuals that can get stuck in being knowledge experts and have this very regimented meaning making of the world, very black and white, as can organizations. And we see that in the way where organizations almost latch onto certain narratives and play them out over and over and over and over again, right? Agile is a great example in the tech industry, right? Where we've almost just forgot to ask ourselves, like, what is the actual problem we're trying to solve with this whole agile thing? We're playing out these narratives, right? I'm not sure if from your background you will be aware of this, Natalie, but like Scrum stand-ups, right? You ask the 3 questions, and that's what you do, right? And almost the moment we try and challenge that and think a bit differently about that, it starts feeling uncomfortable because we've swallowed that knowledge so whole that we're now had by it. And it might be right in some situations, and it might be right in wrong in other situations. But if we don't slow down enough to ask why are we doing this, what's the real value we're getting from it, we're not, again, consciously, we're just playing out these knowledge narratives rather than consciously co-creating. And very similar to the achiever kind of meaning making, right? In organizations, obviously, a big driver is how do we achieve outcomes? How do we achieve outcomes in service of most organizations, in service of profit and in service of growth, right? And that's that's fine. It's part of the capitalistic society we work in, right? But at what point do we get so attached to this achieving that we lose touch with the bigger picture and the negative externalities that that achieving is having? And I think AI, not right now, is a great example where we're so had by our need to achieve a competitive advantage or maintain a competitive advantage with AI that when we're playing out this achiever action logic from how quickly can we integrate, how quickly can we deploy, how quickly can we upskill, how quickly can we become literate, all of those things, that we don't really slow down enough to just step back a wee bit and see both the positives and the opportunity alongside the negatives and the challenges and the threats. And the problem that we know from vertical development in doing so is that if we're stuck in these lower meaning makings, we can't hold the complexity of it. And if we're not holding the complexity appropriately, the solutions and the actions we're taking isn't fit for purpose. And we're stuck in repeating these cycles. And that's, I think, why for me as a manager, as much as I would hope, my team can tell me if I'm not being authentic, but as much as I would hope I bring a coaching mindset to my interactions, I think this notion of vertical development is even more powerful in looking at how organizations co-create.
Yeah, yeah. Oh man, there's just so much there. When I hear a lot of people talking about AI, I was watching a round table actually recently, and yeah, you see it's like a speeding train, where it's like it's going to do this and we're going to be able to do this and da 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 da. And then they had I think it was like an evolutionary biologist in the debate, and he was kind of like saying, yes, but also da da. And interestingly, he probably spoke a little bit slower. Like he had a slightly different energy about him. So this kind of brings me back to this notion of spaciousness. Because in order to like step back a little bit from being had by something, we need spaciousness. And so I wonder, what does that look like for you, bringing more spaciousness into your life, for you personally, being kinder to yourself, and for in your team?
That is a consistent struggle, Natalie, as I'm sure it is for many of your listeners as well. The world we live in doesn't invite spaciousness, right? And it definitely is not paying a premium for spaciousness as well, because we're so had collectively in our doing for the sake of doing, and our doing for trying to run after these achievements that society has somehow convinced us is important. The house, the car, the title, right? And the safety of hoarding wealth, right? And we're so had by this, right? And so it's hard. We're always fighting the system that's trying to tell us that's how we need to behave. And the moment that you're far along in your journey to at least have some sense of recognition that actually that's not the way. The way is to allow more heart-centeredness in your life, right? Which is ultimately manifest through spaciousness, right? You really have to start fighting for these things, and I find myself fighting a lot, right? So I'm very privileged myself. So I identify as a Quaker. So I have my Quaker meetings on Sunday, which is an hour of sitting in silence, which I hugely appreciate. I go to a meditation class on Mondays, which again is 45 an hour of sitting in silence, which is again just that very deliberate creating of spaciousness. And then it's through my day, right? I've really had to fight for someone. It's very simple. Fight for putting my hour on my calendar, half an hour on my calendar for lunch, right? And really holding myself accountable for prioritizing that above other things. Putting the afternoon break on the calendar and holding myself accountable for actually doing that, right? And then even more importantly, I've been fascinated. Sorry, this is going on a tangent a wee bit, but I'm excited now. I've been fascinated by this notion of what does it mean to really co-create masterfully, right? And like, what's the adjectives that we would use to describe that? And one of the things that I've really come narrowed down on is the word artful, right? So how can I be ambitious but artful? And because being artful, when I look at an artist, I see people that are really intentional about the journey and not just attached to the destination, right? Very the every brushstroke is important in itself, and that's class. And let's get joy out of making that brushstroke and not again get attached with the whole picture. So I've been trying to really think about and ask myself very frequently and reflecting on myself, how can I be more of an artful manager? And that has been, what do I care less about? What do I just trust or just don't invest my energy into? And what do I care about? And what is impactful? And how can I really bring that intentionality to doing that, even though it feels in our hyper achiever world that I'm underperforming because I'm doing less, but giving myself the permission to know that I'm, at the risk of sounding arrogant, but I might be one step further in this journey that we call awakening than many people in my environment, and therefore it should feel a bit uncomfortable for me because I'm trying to do something differently that maybe people around me haven't quite seen the value of for, and that's okay. I'm saying that with love and kindness and non-judgment, but it's hard sometimes is to just shovel that way into getting some space around you and giving myself permission to not feel guilty about that.
Yeah, and I think getting more comfortable with some people not understanding, can be difficult too. So that leads me on to the question, what is your developmental edge right now, and how are you meeting it?
What's my developmental edge? I think my developmental edge right now is writing. I've been trying to really, I've always convinced myself I'm going to have a blog, and it's not even about the creating the content. It's about the discipline of sitting down and trying to structure thoughts and thinking. So I've been really trying to do that a bit more. As you, Natalie, you know me, I love reading. But I also love reading, having multiple conversations with multiple books at the same time. I'm never quite done because I'm always one chapter forward, one chapter backward, new book. It's a bit of a dance I do as well. But I've been trying to, why I read like that, it's the beauty of conversations emerging between books about putting things together and integrating things. And I've been trying to spend more time writing that, and for some people it might be journaling. For me, it's been taken a more formal form of trying to blog more or be more formal in my writing, but that's been very, very good for me because I think it brings the intentionality to thinking, and I think that's also a precondition of how we co-create more effectively, which would resonate with you as a kind of inner developmental goal practitioner as well. That kind of cognitive pillar is very important in how we show up more consciously in the world.
Yeah, and it also sounds like it's a very active, intentional way of you making sense of things and making sense of what you're reading. And I had this word weaving, like, sounds like you're weaving things together.
Here's another one that I want to share with your readers that, again, it was originally a permission to myself, right? But I want to share it as a permission to others. I've become obsessed with time blocking on my calendar, right? And this is like following a year of different evolutions of doing this dance of time and figuring out how I can fit more in or fit less in and create more spaciousness. And the one thing that I've really benefited from was blocking on my calendar what I've been spending my time on across a week, and just taking 5 minutes to look back on that at the end of the week. And I think the value in that is the recognition about our cognitive dissonance we have between how long something takes and how long we think it's something will take and how long it actually takes. Especially it actually takes when you feel called to bring that artfulness to it as well, right? But regardless of that, still there's this gap. And I think for us as managers, if you do work in an organization, the clearer you get in your head about these two things, the gap, the more effective I believe you can be in not overcommitting your teams, right? Because when we start overcommitting ourselves and our teams, we start pushing towards the performative rather than the transformative. Because that always happens in an organization, right? Like there's always two things happening in every organization. There's the dance of performance and there's the dance of transformance. And when the slack goes out of your day, when we get so crunched in, just out of pure fight freeze mechanism, we start doing the performative, right? So for us to create more space for ourselves as leaders to be more transformative, but also for our teams to be more transformative, we need to create the spaciousness, because
Yeah.
it's the spaciousness in which the magic grows. And for
Yeah.
us to be able to do that, we need to be much more mindful about our intention, much more mindful about what time really means. And we've lost track with that a lot.
Totally. And I think that's also how we just get to like the end of the year and we're like, whoa, what happened? You know, that just flew by. And I think one thing I've started to try and be a bit more conscious of is reflecting on what I've done in the week. And actually, in doing that, I've realized how much I actually do, because I spend so much of my thought process thinking about what I haven't done and what I haven't squeezed in, and what I, that kind of pressure of, I don't know, expectation or what I should be, or it's that recognition of how much we do actually do in a week as well. And I think probably for those of you working in an organization, I mean, I think back to my days at BlackRock, and I used to think in sort of half an hour increments because I was trying to squeeze so much in. And I remember like sometimes just going to the bathroom just to have a rest, just to like get spaciousness, which is crazy now. But yeah, if you can have the courage and the discipline and the intentionality and the artfulness to really think about time, I love that invitation that you've given.
Giving yourself the invitation to recognize that, yes, it feels weird, right? It feels like you're challenging a whole system by just trying to create more spaciousness in your day. But that's the work that our generation is being called to do, right? Like just if you just think about in organizations the communication thread, right? The communication channels. And now there's hyper connective. We have Slack, we have Teams, we have emails, we have paid comment. We have WhatsApp. You can do commenting threads in your Lucid Charge. You can do commenting threads in your Confluence, Jira tickets. Everywhere you see these conversations spinning up, right, in a very haphazard way. And you feel, because the system's doing it, you feel you have to participate, right? Because you feel judged because everybody's doing it, so I should be able to do it. But no, just because that is where the system's going through doesn't mean that's the way that we as humans need to interact with each other, right? It doesn't mean that's the way that we need to cultivate meaningful conversations and meaningful relationships. We have, again, talking about this vertical developmental thing, in your journey, you have a big step of your journey is being able to step back far enough to say that just because this is what is doesn't make it right, doesn't make it good. And then that's where the joy starts, right? Because then once you're able to see that, okay, there is real opportunity for improvement here, then you can start getting excited about what those opportunities are, which ones are your opportunities to interact with, and how do you invest your one good life in co-creating something that's better, right? For the, like, I don't even have children, but I love saying I have a granddaughter now through my husband, and I just want to make sure that when she hits the industry, that like she doesn't have to feel this overwhelm every day. So yeah.
I love that invitation. I'm getting excited now as well, because what's coming to me is, I think there's so many big systemic problems we have in the world. You look out there and you think, gosh, how can I have an impact on creating a good society, or the war happening wherever. And actually, in just being courageous to make different decisions that might challenge the small system that you're in, like choosing not to respond to every single communication channel because it's overwhelming, and being more disciplined about, this is how I communicate. Even small things like that, they're kind of almost like, it sounds cheesy, but quite revolutionary, and can, like that butterfly effect that we were talking about in the beginning, have an impact on other people.
I get where you're coming from with the word cheesy, but we really have to recognize that it is as simple as this, right? I believe change is as simple of us really doing the work to connect with our personal integrity, and then being able to make those decisions out of self-discipline, what you've kind of mentioned there, every day, to live in alignment with that personal integrity. And it feels uncomfortable, right? Because we're challenging the system. But the one thing that we need to recognize about the system is that we, each and every one of us, is part of the system, right?
Yeah.
And some of us maybe, and this is, if you want to say more so than others, but that doesn't really get us something very productive, but we're all part of the system, right? We might be little cogs in a big wheel, but the cogs is as much the wheel as the wheel, right? And for the wheel to churn differently, the cogs need to start churning differently. And I love this notion of just finding these islands of coherence. That Active Hope community has been a great islands of coherence for me, because it's a community that just seems to think a tiny bit more as the way that I want to think about the world. And we can find those in organizations, in cities, and build and weave those communities, because we get resourced through each other by affirming each other. Like, I'm affirming you to say, yes, it's okay to really manage your time and create those spaciousness. It's okay to reflect on your week. It's okay to switch off and not be enticed with all of these things. And if we can all just shift the tiny wee bit, the system shifts with us.
Yeah, you've really you're creating a lot of energy in me to be more courageous about some of those, because that's still a practice for me. It's still a developmental edge, going against the system, and I think we can do that in small ways. I probably do it more than I think I do, actually, saying that. So final question. I feel like we could probably talk for a lot longer.
As always.
But I know we kind of go get more and more expansive. Have you started your blog?
I have started my blog.
Does it have a name?
It has a name. It's called Balderdash, but it's not. I couldn't get the URL for Balderdash. If somebody owns that URL, please gift it me. No, it's called Balderdash, and I call it Balderdash because it means like just like inner murmurings, just like noise almost. Because I really struggled about when, like, you doing a podcast now, and I think that's great, and I think you have a voice and you hold space so beautifully for others. That's great. But also parts of me is like, do we need another podcast in the world, right? Do we need more? Do I need to create more LinkedIn content as a thought leader? And I almost just wanted to start with, and similar to what you said earlier to me about your podcast as well. It's a container for meaningful conversations, and that's beautiful. And my blog is a container for me to put my thought leadership out in the world, but it's not trying to pretend to be anything. It's not
No.
trying to tell somebody something. And there's beauty in that as well.
Yeah, and I did go through those thoughts myself about this podcast, and where I got to with it, just if it's helpful, is for me, it feels like a real channel for creativity. It doesn't really have an outcome. I don't know where it's going to go or how long it will last, and but it feels like it's nourishing and
Mm.
a product of my creative fire. And regardless of who watches it, or I do hope, because I think the people that I'm talking to have some really interesting lives and ideas and values. But ultimately, it's about creativity. And I think that it's like that notion that you spoke about of being artful. How can we bring more ways that we can be artful and creative into our lives? Because I do think that that's missing. And so, yeah, forget about the success, forget about viewership. Just create, create for the sake of creating.
Something beauty, and that's what's deeply human. Is just that expressing and creating. And
Yeah,
if we can do that with love, then we're on the right path.
yeah, yeah. Um, okay, I'm gonna,
I
and
feel I feel held in love in this beautiful conversation. Thank you for inviting me today. I'm truly grateful for your thoughtful questions, and it's always such a lovely thing to spend time with you.
likewise, Eric, thank you so much. And is there a link to your blog? Are you ready to kind of share it, or is it more of
Yes.
a
So
private?
it's Eric FW at sorry, not at ericfw.co.za, but I will send that over to you as well. And you can
Yeah,
maybe put it in your footnotes.
I will do. All right, thank you,
Uh,
Eric. Speak
Have a
soon.
great one. Bye.